Okay, hi everybody. So here we are again. I wanted to do a video today in the series talking about holding space for a business. So under kind of some of the business space and content I give. And I wanted to talk about boundaries as it relates to our business. And I was reminded of this today with the conversation with a client and also some inquiries on my retreat rental. And I just observed myself being in a little bit of fear. And I was reminded of this kind of the space of boundaries. And I think that one of the things that I notice and observe, especially with my clients, and I think when we're first starting out, is I think sometimes we feel like in relationship to clients in our business that we can't maybe assert the boundaries that are comfortable for us. So for me, I sort of observed or held this belief that my offerings and my services, across the board, that I have to basically create an accommodation to the client. And that would mean that I would often ignore, or I would not even create attention to or tune into my own sort of boundaries around what felt like a respectful way of entering into, maybe a contract with a client, or even in my accommodation center. I notice how easily it is for me to accommodate people and kind of abandon my own boundaries. And so I kind of at a point right now where I can see this pattern for me. This is often something that's like a really big aha moment with my clients when I start to talk about you have to consider yourself, in your spaces and how you create space for your work and what your offerings are, and make sure that it really lines up to you too, and that we don't self-sacrifice because we want to accommodate. Because what's going to happen for that, I know with me, when I self-sacrifice, it creates anxiety. I often will maybe can feel resentful to the client. I get angry. And essentially what those warning signs are telling me that I've abandoned a boundary along the way. And then I know for myself, I think, by the way, one of the things that is highly dysfunctional in our society is boundaries. I don't think we're taught how to do boundaries in a balanced way. So most of us have, I think, some dysfunction around boundaries. And for me, one of the things that has been my own personal learning or conditioning around boundaries is it's not okay to have them. And so I have this tremendous fear that if I have the boundaries that I really desire to have in my business, that client won't want to work with me. And so what happens is my boundary is driven from a place of fear instead of empowerment. And anytime that we are driving anything from fear, it's probably going to create a little bit of murkiness and muddiness. And I will say I have gotten really hard lessons about this over the years in terms of not having proper contracts or agreements with clients and it getting messy, or, ending up giving so much away that I feel resentful and I'm not charging enough. That really what it creates is a place where I'm not happy, and I don't, it becomes kind of like a toxic relationship or a toxic environment. And so I wanted to deepen that, because I see this, I witness this, with my clients, is we often, we're afraid to set a boundary or to create a space that feels aligned to us, because maybe we're afraid if we do that, it's not going to be able to accommodate the client. And so we tend to accommodate the client over ourselves. And so one of the things that I want to offer is this. First of all, when we have healthy and strong boundaries and we're in our alignment around that, whether it's about pricing or length of time of our sessions with our clients, or I'm thinking of in my retreat center, one of the important boundary spaces is having me charge for, things like my cleaning fee and different things like that. So I'm not sacrificing what I need to do to basically financially support my space. So boundaries are there in order to ensure that we are getting that reciprocal that we need in order to hold space for the client. And there's also a really clear container that's created that is at the benefit of both of us. Because when things are murky, or when we're feeling angry or resentful, that's going to bleed into the dynamic and the energy between our clients or our services. And whether we think people are conscious of it or not, it's going to have an impact, you know? And so I think one of the things that's really important when we talk about this is to, first of all, have that awareness of, I think what's been very empowering for me is to know something about myself that boundaries and alignment is something that creates some discomfort for me. And I get discomfort and I get fearful. And that discomfort often drives my lack of boundaries or alignment. That's going to feel really beneficial also to me, because ideally we want the spaces that we're creating to feel supportive of our clients, but also us. So we don't want to forget ourselves. And as a recovering self-sacrificer, it's not comfortable for me to be there, but it's also equally and probably more so uncomfortable when I'm self-sacrificing. So the thing that I have to remind myself is, when I self-sacrifice, I'm actually creating the thing that I fear that I'm going to create. As opposed to when I'm in that pattern of self-sacrificing, it's not actually creating the space and the needs for myself or my client. So just telling my brain that and being able to rewire that belief system and also know that that's my tendency is really supportive. And so now my process becomes, when I have a new client sign on, or I'm thinking about, you know, creating a new offering or new space, whether that's a retreat or a coaching container, or accommodation service, I'm really thoughtful about giving myself some time to really sit with and be with, what does it need to be also for me? Because sometimes when we rush through things, so sometimes when I did is, if I had a client say, I really want to work with you, or somebody says, I really want to work your space, because I was so excited about getting the business, I would rush into creating an outline of the program. And so now I really take some time and a pause to really sit with it. I don't have to be driven by urgency. And I really pay attention as I'm mapping something out of, how am I feeling with what I'm mapping out? So does it feel supportive of me energetically? Does it feel supportive of me financially? And does it feel good? Am I honoring those boundaries? And to inform what those boundaries want to be, is we do want to think about, what does that mutual supportive space feel like? And so for me, I want it to feel mutually beneficial for myself and my client. The energy exchange feels equal and fair. I want to feel really good entering to that space. And part of what makes that feel very good is when the kind of the time and the investment feels supported for both me and the client. How do we know what that is? You need to know what your energy is, and you need to sort of know what feels supportive for you in that financial space. And so that's kind of a whole other thing of going into, how do we figure that out? But essentially for me, I need to be able to pay my bills, right? And you know, maybe have a little bit of extra. So my prices need to reflect that. So it has to do with, what's the financial investment, what's the time investment, and for me to really consider, what are all of those costs that go involved in it. So with my retreat business, one of the things that I would often do is, I wouldn't pay attention to, I wouldn't think about, like, well, how much does it charge for me to have a cleaning company come, or a cleaner to come? So now I charge a cleaning fee, and I never used to charge that. And so the cleaning fee was something I forgot that I had. And so that was an expense that I wasn't factoring in. So sort of informing ourselves of what that all looks like is really important. Knowing that if there's a guilt that sort of starts to come up of, I feel guilty of imposing this on a client, is that we have to appreciate that guilt is not an authentically driven emotion. It often comes from outside of ourselves, in terms of what we've picked up along the way, or what our conditioning is. So whenever I'm feeling guilty about something, I know that that's not a trustworthy place for me to create through. So I'm not going to assert my, let's say, investment or cost based on my guilt, because the guilt isn't coming from any place other than my guilt, which is basically wanting to make me feel comfortable. But it's derived from a sense of fear and inauthenticity. So I want to create from a place of authenticity, empowerment, and also support and nourishment on both sides. And so what that does is it gives me a clarity and intention of how I'm creating sort of spaces in my work in terms of what those boundaries are. And then I create time for me when I'm answering an inquiry of my accommodation, or having a conversation with a new client. is really thinking about what's my process to really sit with that so that I don't operate from the place of urgency and I'm not doing things from fear. And then before that, I want to have sort of a knowing in myself of what are my boundaries and alignment that I know that are important to me, that are necessary if I'm also going to show up in my full capacity for my clients and also create an environment that feels welcoming to people. So sort of having our baseline. And sometimes what I have to do every now and again is revisit that of like, okay, what is my alignment? So if you have clients currently, or you have a service that you're offering and something's feeling really not good, I want you to think about what's not feeling good about that. Is it the length of time that you're, holding your sessions, and maybe you don't have a time limit? This is a very common thing that I have with my clients where they say they're doing an hour session that tends to go 2 hours. So there's a murky line in terms of the timing of the session. Is it that you're charging too low? What are you charging? Is it that you're working with somebody that doesn't respect your boundaries? And so the other thing I think from that place of scarcity is we feel like maybe there's people that don't exist that are going to be able to align to what feels really important to us to create in our boundaries. And what I will say to you is having this clarity of your boundaries around your services actually helps weed out the people that aren't going to support them, and that there are people that will. So I very happily have, clients in my facility that are happy to pay the cleaning fee. They don't say anything about that, and they understand that. I have clients that work with me in my coaching practice that are super happy with my fees and how I structure that, and they love that space. And if somebody is not aligned with that, then I'm not the right mentor for them. And so I'm not driven by scarcity. And I think there's the other thing too, where scarcity drives our abandonment of our boundaries and our self-sacrifice. You can kind of underscore that. Scarcity drives abandonment and self-sacrifice. Scarcity, again, is derived from a place of fear. And it's a fear-based kind of thinking. I don't want to create my spaces on fear, because that's a low vibration and it just doesn't feel good. So it's another thing that I track back to. I want to create spaces and offerings that feel empowering, that feel nourishing, that feel supportive, that feel aligned for both me and my client. So thinking about the energy that I want to cultivate in my offerings and in everything I do, all my services, is really key. And so everything needs to reflect that. And then I need to remind myself that. So when somebody comes and asks, can I work with you, or this and that I'm really listening to that. And then if something kind of feels off, I sit with it and I say, okay, what feels off about this? And sometimes it's not that the client completely feels off. It might be that I am about to offer them to work with me at a discounted rate, and that feels off. Or I'm waiving my cleaning fee, which that feels off because I actually need to charge that. And so what it allows me to do is to think about where, again, that's being driven from and what I'm sacrificing, so I don't repeat that pattern. So creating that intention for discernment is really, really important in the pause. I've found that what works for me is I don't pitch people over the phone. So that also lends to what our process is. When I work with people, whether it's renting my facility or as a coaching client, there's an application that people have to fill out. I need more information in terms of, length of time, where this person is at in their journey, if it's my coaching. And then for my facility rental, it's, how many people, what is the event, so that I can inform what my boundaries are going to be. And then it gives me time to really sit with that and feel, is this an appropriate thing for me to step into or not? So I've set up sort of these processes that are super supportive for me. As a side example, I used to do, for my retreat business, I used to do Instant Book on VRBO. I've actually taken Instant Book off because it didn't allow me to filter people. And it didn't allow me to sort of have a little bit of control of how I set the boundaries and how I discern who gets to come here. And having, certain groups that maybe didn't feel completely aligned to the space really taught me that that's a really important thing. So my adjustment of that boundary was, I need to have a process of discernment. With my clients, I have an application form that people have, and then I like to have a conversation to kind of see where people are at. And then from that conversation, I create an offering for that person, because sometimes I'll do like custom offerings for people. And that helps me, again, stay in my alignment and create a process that feels supportive of myself and my clients, where I'm not self-sacrificing. I'm not evoking a sense of fear. And I'm really being mindful of being able to present something that feels like it's going to be supportive both ways. This has changed completely my life in my business. And I think before, it was very easy for me to feel burnt out and depleted and resentful, undercharge, have like no boundaries with clients. Like I used to have where clients would be texting me or messaging me all the time, and that expectation of needing to get back right away, which sometimes is hard when I have other things going on. It was miserable. I basically started to not love what I did. And so I think that when we're in that space where we're feeling depleted or we don't love what we do, one of the first places that we can look is, what are our boundaries and alignment around our services, and how are we holding space for that? Because chances are, lack of boundaries creates depletion. Lack of boundaries creates burnout. Lack of boundaries creates resentment and anger. That's not going to be sustainable for us. And on the flip side, to our clients, when we're holding that energy, that's not really supportive and empowering for them. And so we want to think about that, not sort of be unconscious of how we are, holding our spaces in relationship to that. So, think about this, where this really resonated for you, and think about, where am I not holding boundaries, and where I can maybe sit with some of the things I offered here. What does it look like for me to create some of those boundaries and alignment in my practice? And what is going to be a process that I can create for myself to make sure that I don't abandon that, and to really be thoughtful about what that is. And a reminder, scarcity and guilt are driven through fear. Those are not places of wisdom to follow. It's just, it's fear and guilt. So not authentic emotions, not wise places of, I really need to listen and trust, put my trust in what those, places are telling me. You can attract really incredible clients and services that also feel really good to you, and that exist. And if there's a little bit of work that you need to do around unpacking some of the stuff around the boundaries, do that and really sit with that, of like, where does that fear come from? Where does that guilt come from? And what's maybe a more empowered way that I can hold the space of this, so that I feel really good, and on the flip side, my clients feel really good as well. And to know that that exists, I think that one of the things that I will often say to myself is, there are people, clients, guests that are out there that are going to be in complete alignment with my boundaries and be happy to step into them. And so I don't have to go to this place of accommodation at the expense of myself, because of that being driven by scarcity, which is often what that is. So there we have it today. I hope that was illuminating for, anything that maybe you're sitting with right now. Questions and comments, feel free to pop them in the comment box, and I'm happy to speak to it. You can check out more of my stuff. Obviously, you can go through some of my other videos on my YouTube channel. You can also check out my website, hillaryschneider.com, or you can follow me on Facebook, Hillary Schneider. Also, I have a podcast, Women Who Runs with Horses. And of course, if you're in a space where you're looking for a mentor to support you in some of these things, this is what I do. This is part of my jam. So you can kind of look that up too. Otherwise, hope that was helpful for you guys, and we'll see you on the next video.